At 400 feet below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, the steel hull of a submarine begins to groan. The pressure at that depth is 13 times what it is at the surface. Every square inch of the hull is bearing 200 pounds of force, and 400 feet is the limit. The design crush depth, the point beyond which the Navy cannot guarantee survival. USS Harder's depth gauge read 500 feet, then 600. Then it stopped working entirely, because the gauge was only designed to measure depths the submarine was never supposed to reach. Above them, Japanese destroyers were dropping pattern after pattern of depth charges. Below them, nothing but the crushing dark of the abyss. Commander Sam Dealey had a choice: surface and die from Japanese guns, or keep diving and die from physics. He looked at his crew. He looked at the hull, bending visibly inward. Take her deeper. This is the story of the submarine that dove 500 feet past its own death and survived. Before I tell you how USS Harder survived the impossible, you need to understand what was supposed to kill her. A submarine is, fundamentally, a steel tube designed to resist pressure. That sounds simple. It is not. Water is heavy. At sea level, the atmosphere presses down on you with about 15 pounds per square inch. You don't notice it because you felt it your entire life. But water is 800 times denser than air. And for every 33 feet you descend, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. By 100 feet, the pressure has quadrupled. By 300 feet, it's 10 times surface pressure. The Gato-class submarines of World War II, the boats that won the Pacific War, were rated for a test depth of 300 feet. That was the maximum depth for routine operations, the safe zone. Below that was a buffer zone, 300 to 400 feet. This is where things got uncomfortable. The hull was still within its design limits, but barely. Naval engineers called this the caution zone, and below 400 feet was the unknown, the theoretical crush depth, the point at which the pressure would exceed the strength of the steel, and the hull would implode. An implosion at depth happens faster than the human brain can process. The hull collapses at approximately the speed of sound in steel, about 15,000 feet per second. The entire submarine, 300 feet of steel, machinery, and human beings, compresses into roughly 1/3 of its original volume. Everyone dies instantly. There is no warning, no pain, no time. 400 feet. That was the line. Now here's what the Navy didn't tell submarine crews. Crush depth was a calculation, an estimate based on the strength of steel, the thickness of the hull, and the diameter of the pressure vessel. It assumed average materials, average construction, average everything. But submarines weren't built by averages. They were built by individual welders in Groton, Connecticut, and Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Men who took pride in their work. Men whose brothers and sons were serving on these boats. A good weld was stronger than the steel around it. A bad weld was a weak point waiting to fail. The difference was invisible until it mattered. No one on USS Harder knew whether their boat was built by a master craftsman or an exhausted worker on a double shift. They were about to find out. The other thing trying to kill them was simpler to understand. Depth charges are barrels filled with explosives, designed to sink and detonate at preset depths. A direct hit would open the hull like a can opener. But even a near miss was devastating. When a depth charge explodes underwater, it creates a pressure wave that travels outward in all directions. Water doesn't compress, so that pressure transmits almost perfectly. A charge exploding 50 feet away could rupture pipes, shatter gauges, and knock men off their feet. A charge exploding 25 feet away could crack welds and buckle bulkheads. A charge exploding 10 feet away would kill everyone aboard. And on June 10th, 1944, USS Harder had 4 Japanese destroyers directly above her, dropping charges as fast as their crews could reload. USS Harder was commissioned on December 2nd, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor. She was a Gato-class submarine, 311 feet long with a crew of 65 men and enough torpedoes to sink a fleet. Her first captain was a 36-year-old Texan named Samuel David Dealey, and from the moment he took command, everyone knew this boat was going to be different. Dealey was not like other submarine commanders. He was aggressive to the point of recklessness. He attacked targets that other captains avoided. He stayed on the surface longer than regulations allowed. He took risks that should have gotten him killed. At Harder's commissioning ceremony, he told his crew something that became legendary in the submarine service. "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." No one got off. In her first 5 war patrols, USS Harder sank 16 enemy ships, more than almost any other submarine in the Pacific, but what made her famous wasn't the cargo ships or transports. It was the destroyers. Destroyers were submarine killers. They were fast, maneuverable, loaded with depth charges, and equipped with sonar. Conventional submarine doctrine was simple. If you see a destroyer, run, dive deep, go silent, pray. Sam Dealey did the opposite. On Harder's 5th patrol alone, Dealey sank 3 Japanese destroyers in 4 days. 3 ships specifically designed to kill submarines, killed by the submarine they were hunting. The Japanese started calling him the destroyer killer. His own men called him something simpler, the captain who wasn't afraid of anything. But Dealey wasn't suicidal. He was calculating. He understood something that other commanders didn't. A destroyer's depth charges had to sink to the submarine's depth before exploding. That took time. If the submarine was already moving, already diving, already taking evasive action, the charges would explode where she had been, not where she was. The key was to move faster than the enemy could react. Attack first. Dive immediately. Go deep. Go silent. Go deeper than any submarine was supposed to go. June 10th, 1944. USS Harder was on her 5th war patrol, operating near the Sibutu passage in the Philippines. She had already sunk 2 destroyers in the past 3 days. The Japanese knew she was there. They were hunting her with everything they had. At 06:15, Harder surfaced to charge her batteries. Diesel submarines could only stay submerged for about 24 hours before their batteries died. Eventually, they had to come up. The radar operator's voice cut through the morning quiet. "Contact. Multiple contacts. Bearing 045. Fast screws. Destroyers." Dealey grabbed his binoculars. On the horizon, 4 shapes, Japanese destroyers, running at full speed directly toward Harder's position. They had been waiting. Dealey had maybe 90 seconds before the destroyers would be close enough to see him. He could try to run on the surface, but destroyers were faster. He could submerge to periscope depth and try to slip away, but their sonar would find him. Or he could do what he always did. Battle stations, prepare to attack. For the next 8 minutes, USS Harder played the most dangerous game in submarine warfare. Dealey watched through the periscope as the lead destroyer closed to 3,000 yards, then 2,000, then 1,500. At 1,100 yards, point-blank range for a submarine, he fired. 3 torpedoes, spread pattern, running hot and straight toward the destroyer's bow. 2 hit. The destroyer's bow exploded. She began sinking immediately, But now the other 3 destroyers knew exactly where Harder was, and they were coming. "Dive! Dive! Take her down! Emergency deep!" Harder went down like a stone. 200 feet. The normal patrol depth. Water rushing past the hull. 300 feet. Test depth. The limit for routine operations. Above them, the destroyers were dropping charges. 6 per pattern, then reloading, then dropping more. The first pattern exploded at 200 feet, exactly where Harder had been 30 seconds earlier. The concussion rocked the boat. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation rained down from the overhead. But they were already deeper. At 400 feet, the hull began to speak. It started as a low groan, metal flexing under pressure. Then individual pops and pings, rivets shifting in their holes. Then a continuous sound that submariners called singing. The entire pressure hull vibrating like a tuning fork. Every man aboard knew what that sound meant. They were at crushed depth. And they were still diving. Dealey's voice came through the boat, steady as a Sunday sermon. "All ahead 1/3. Rig for silent running. Take her to 500 feet. 500 feet. No Gato-class submarine had ever been officially recorded at 500 feet. The gauges weren't even calibrated that deep. The hull was now compressing by measurable amounts. The deck plates shifted. Locker doors popped open. The entire boat was getting shorter, physically shrinking under the pressure. Water began streaming through the propeller shaft seals. Not a trickle, a steady flow that splashed against the engine room deck. The bilge pumps kicked on automatically. Then the crew shut them off. The noise would give away their position. They sat in silence, listening to the water rise around their ankles. The destroyers were getting better. The second pattern exploded at 350 feet, close enough to knock men off their feet, close enough to crack gauges and rupture pipes. The third pattern was closer still. Dealey looked at the depth, 500 feet. The destroyers were setting their charges for 350. If he went deeper, he might escape the explosions. If the hull held, take her to 600 feet. At 600 feet, the depth gauge stopped working. The engineering officer calculated their depth from pressure readings on the ballast tank indicators. His best estimate, 600 feet. Maybe more. The singing of the hull had become a continuous scream, not metaphorical, an actual high-pitched tone that filled the entire boat. The crew sat motionless. They were breathing as little as possible, both to conserve oxygen and because any sound might attract the destroyers. 65 men holding their breath, waiting to die. A rivet failed somewhere aft. It sounded like a gunshot in the silence. No one moved. At 0845, the fourth depth charge pattern exploded. But this time the sound was different. Duller, more distant. The charges were exploding above them. The destroyers couldn't reach them at this depth. Their depth charges were designed for 400 feet maximum. Harder was below the kill zone, but they couldn't stay here. The hull was at its absolute limit. Every minute increased the chance of catastrophic failure, and the water was still rising. For the next 90 minutes, USS Harder sat at 600 feet, while Japanese destroyers circled above. The Japanese captains knew the submarine was down there, but they couldn't reach her. Their charges exploded uselessly, hundreds of feet too shallow. At 0945, the first destroyer left, low on depth charges, at 10:15 the second. At 10:30, the sonar pings began to fade. The remaining destroyers were moving away, searching other areas. At 10:45, Sam Dealey gave the order, "All ahead slow. Make your depth 400 feet. Quietly." USS Harder rose from the abyss like a creature returning from the dead. As she ascended, the hull began to decompress. The singing stopped. The deck plates settled back into position, the visible warping slowly, impossibly, reversed. Steel has a property called elasticity. Below a certain threshold of deformation, it will return to its original shape when pressure is removed. Harder's hull had bent, but it hadn't broken. At 400 feet, the bilge pumps came on. At 300 feet, damage control parties began their assessments. Ruptured pipes, cracked gauges, failed electrical connections, 3 feet of water in the engine room. But the pressure hull was intact. Every weld had held. Every rivet had stayed in place, except for one. USS Harder surfaced at 2,200, 9 hours after the first alarm. Her crew stood on deck, breathing fresh air, looking at stars they hadn't expected to see again. Sam Dealey wrote in his patrol report, "Dove to 600 feet or more to avoid depth charging. Hull showed considerable strain, but no permanent damage observed. That was all." 14 words to describe the deepest dive in the history of the Gato-class fleet. USS Harder completed her 5th patrol and returned to port as a legend. The destroyer killer had done it again. Sam Dealey was awarded his 4th Navy Cross. His crew was given the Presidential Unit Citation. Every man aboard was a hero. 2 months later, on August the 24th, 1944, USS Harder departed on her 6th war patrol. She was never seen again. The exact cause of her loss is unknown. She may have been sunk by depth charges off Luzon. She may have struck a mine. No distress call was ever received. All 65 crew members, including Commander Sam Dealey, were lost. Dealey was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. Today, nuclear submarines routinely operate at depths that would have crushed USS Harder like an aluminum can. The Seawolf class is designed for operations at over 1,600 feet. Some Russian submarines have reportedly gone even deeper, but no submarine crew will ever experience what Harder's men experienced. The terror of descending beyond the known, beyond the designed, beyond the possible. Trusting their lives to welders they never met and steel they couldn't see. Every submarine that has ever survived beyond its rated depth did so because someone built it better than the blueprints required. Sam Dealey once wrote that he wasn't afraid of depth. He was afraid of staying still while the enemy was above him. On June 10th, 1944, he took his submarine to 600 feet because the alternative was certain death at 400. And 65 men followed him into the abyss because they trusted him more than they trusted physics. USS Harder dove 500 feet past her crush depth and came back. That's not a miracle. That's what happens when the best captain in the submarine service meets the best of welders in Connecticut. And they both refuse to quit. If you found this story incredible, you should see what happened when one destroyer took on 23 Japanese warships, including the largest battleship ever built, and won. That video is right here. I'll see you there.